What if I told you that there's a dark, hidden truth about London's most vulnerable children? A truth so shocking that it could shatter everything you thought you knew about the city's leaders and its justice system. A decorated police detective with 25 years of experience just exposed one of the most disturbing child trafficking scandals in modern British history, and the people who should have been protecting those children have been covering it up for decades. Detective John Wedger, a man who devoted his life to investigating London's most horrific crimes, is now a whistleblower, speaking out about a system that failed to protect children from sex traffickers and predators. But why, you might ask, would someone like Wedger risk everything? His career, his home, his family, all because he tried to stop 52 children from being exploited by sex traffickers in London. This story is one that will shake you to your core, and it's one that the mainstream media will avoid at all costs. But the truth can no longer stay buried. So stay tuned, because I'm about to show you what Wedger uncovered and why this story is bigger than just one detective's testimony. This is a scandal that reaches the very heart of British politics, law enforcement, and the elite circles of London. John Wedger is no ordinary cop. He's a decorated detective who's spent 25 years working in some of the toughest, most dangerous corners of London, investigating everything from street-level crime to organized criminal networks. He became known for his relentless drive to uncover the truth, regardless of how deep the corruption ran. For 2 decades, Wedger served in the Metropolitan Police and dedicated himself to investigating the city's most serious and often disturbing crimes. He was lauded for his commitment to justice, his refusal to let the system sweep things under the rug, and his unwavering belief in protecting the most vulnerable. But despite his long-standing career, his most important investigation didn't take place on the streets of London's toughest neighborhoods or in the back alleys where gangs operate. It took place in the most vulnerable places in the city, the care homes, where children who had already suffered unimaginable abuse were being trafficked, used, and sold. Wedger's investigation started small, with one case of a missing child. But what he uncovered would soon spiral into something far bigger than anyone could have imagined. The truth Wedger uncovered was both shocking and heartbreaking. Children as young as 9 years old, many of them already in care homes or vulnerable living situations, were being sold and trafficked through a sophisticated network in London. These children were moved from crack houses in rundown areas to expensive hotels in the heart of London's most prestigious districts. These children weren't simply being taken to low-level criminal dens. They were being sold like commodities to the highest bidder. In the most exclusive areas of London, such as Mayfair, they were sold for up to £2,000 each. The buyers? Wealthy businessmen, politicians, and the elite. The kind of people you'd expect to dine in fancy restaurants, not the kind of people you'd expect to find involved in child trafficking. But the worst part? This wasn't an isolated case. This was an industry. A network that spanned multiple London boroughs, Tower Hamlets, Camden, Westminster, and Haringey, each with their own network of victims, clients, and traffickers. But even as Wedger began piecing together the evidence, he quickly discovered that his efforts to expose the operation were being blocked by those in power. Police officers, local officials, and even his own colleagues within the police force seemed to actively try to suppress his findings. Detective Wedger was stunned. After spending his entire career working to expose criminals, he now found himself facing resistance from the very system he had spent decades working within. Senior police officers, council representatives, and other high-ranking officials all turned their backs on him. They didn't just fail to support him, they actively tried to stop him from going public with his findings. When Wedger presented his evidence, detailed police reports, contemporary notes, and even testimonies from victims to his superiors, he didn't get the response he expected. Instead of support or an investigation into the issue, Wedger was told to keep quiet or risk losing everything: his job, his family, even his home. Wedger was given an ultimatum: stay silent about the children being trafficked and exploited, or face the consequences. It wasn't just a career-threatening decision. It was a life-threatening one. His reputation was on the line. His family's safety was at risk. But Wedger couldn't stand by and watch as children were being destroyed by this system. The authorities were clearly trying to cover up what had been happening for years, even decades. And the system that was supposed to protect children was doing everything in its power to protect itself instead. Now, let's talk about Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London. He's the man who was elected to protect London's vulnerable communities, a man who promised to tackle everything from homelessness to crime. He's positioned himself as a protector of the city's most at-risk populations. But Khan's response to this scandal? Silence. Or, when he was asked directly about these disturbing revelations, his team tried to discredit the accusations, dismissing them as politically motivated. In fact, Khan has dodged questions about the allegations 9 times in the past year alone. 9 separate instances where he could have taken responsibility, addressed the issue, and reassured the public that something would be done to stop the trafficking. But instead, he chose to protect his political image rather than the children whose lives were being ruined. This isn't just about a politician trying to avoid a scandal, it's about a cover-up at the highest levels of government. A cover-up that goes all the way to the top of the police force and the city's political establishment. Wedger wasn't just making accusations without proof. He wasn't making wild claims about something he couldn't substantiate. He kept meticulous records of everything he uncovered. Police reports, witness testimonies, even his own detailed notes, all documenting the horrific trafficking operation he had discovered. And it's not just Wedger's word against the system. His testimony was presented under oath at the 2022 independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, a formal legal process with strict standards of evidence. If Wedger had been lying, if he had been fabricating these stories, he would have faced perjury charges. But he didn't lie. He didn't fabricate. The evidence he provided was real, and the scale of the operation was far bigger than anyone could have imagined. These were real victims, real traffickers, and a real network that was operating across London for years. What Detective Wedger uncovered is one of the most disturbing and shocking criminal operations in modern British history. And the fact that the system not only failed to stop it, but actively tried to silence those who exposed it, tells you everything you need to know about the corruption within our institutions. In the next part, we will dive deeper into the disturbing connections between London's elite and the trafficking network, and the horrific abuse that went unchecked for 2 decades. We'll also explore why the city's authorities, including the Metropolitan Police, were complicit in allowing this operation to continue, and why the authorities would rather protect their own reputation than protect vulnerable children. We've just learned that a decorated police detective, John Wedger, risked everything to expose a child trafficking network that's been operating right under the noses of London's most powerful. The authorities turned their backs, and the mayor, Sadiq Khan, dodged questions 9 times. But what makes this story even darker is the vast web of corruption surrounding it. The network wasn't just confined to a few isolated criminals. No. This was a highly sophisticated operation, spanning multiple boroughs, involving the city's most powerful elites, and protected by those who were supposed to serve and protect. This wasn't a series of unfortunate events. This was organized trafficking. This was institutional failure. And it wasn't just happening in the shadows, it was happening in plain sight, in the wealthiest districts of London, where children were being bought and sold like mere commodities. Let's break down the web of corruption that allowed this to thrive for 20 years. And let's explore why so many powerful people, police officers, politicians, council members, allowed it to continue. Detective Wedger's investigation uncovered something that's hard to even comprehend. These weren't random incidents of trafficking or one-off crimes. This was a highly organized, well-coordinated network that operated across multiple boroughs of London. And its reach extended far beyond the criminals running the operations. Wedger identified 4 key areas in London where the trafficking took place. 1. Tower Hamlets. 2. Camden. 3. Westminster. 4. Haringey. Each of these boroughs wasn't just a place where trafficking happened to occur by chance, it was a hub for these operations. In each area, children were being targeted from care homes, often those who were already vulnerable, and trafficked across the city to various hotels, crack houses, and private residences. The children weren't just being sold for sex, they were moved between different locations and subjected to an organized business model that allowed them to be trafficked with shocking efficiency. But what makes this even more sinister is the location where some of the worst abuse took place: Mayfair, London's most affluent district. Imagine this: the richest, most powerful people in the city, dining in expensive restaurants and making business deals, while children were being sold for sex just down the street. How could something so horrific happen in one of the wealthiest parts of the city, right under the noses of people who claim to care about London's prosperity? The answer is simple: because the elite were involved. These weren't just criminals with a few £100s to their name. These were wealthy businessmen, construction workers, and politicians with the means to pay thousands for these children. Children, some as young as 9 years old, were being traded like commodities, with prices reaching up to £2,000 per child in some cases. And the disturbing part? The rich didn't just turn a blind eye, they participated. They became part of the cycle of exploitation. This wasn't just a low-level crime ring. This was a business, a sophisticated operation designed to exploit the most vulnerable in society for profit. Now, the most troubling part of this entire story is how the authorities, who are supposed to protect us, allowed this to happen. When Detective Wedger first began piecing together the evidence, he believed the police force would support him. But instead, he was met with obstruction. As Wedger dug deeper into the network, he discovered something that could only be described as beyond the pale. Senior police officers and local officials weren't just failing to stop the trafficking, they were actively blocking him from investigating it. Wedger tried to bring his findings to his superiors within the Metropolitan Police, only to be ignored or threatened with disciplinary action. The police weren't investigating the trafficking, they were protecting those involved, covering up the scope of the operation, and silencing anyone who dared to expose the truth. When Wedger tried to go public, he was told, point blank, stay quiet or risk losing everything. His job, his home, even his children's safety. The system didn't care about the children who were being exploited. It cared about preserving its own reputation. And anyone who threatened to tear that reputation down, anyone who tried to expose the scale of the abuse, was punished. This wasn't just a case of negligence. This was deliberate suppression. The system wasn't just failing to protect the children, it was actively participating in their exploitation by shutting down efforts to expose it. One of the most disturbing aspects of this story is how the care homes became a feeding ground for traffickers. The children in these homes were already vulnerable, having experienced trauma or neglect in their lives. They were the perfect targets for predators looking to exploit their weakness. Care homes are meant to be safe spaces for children who have nowhere else to go. These institutions are supposed to be the last line of defense against exploitation. But what Wedger uncovered was a horrifying reality. These children were being preyed upon by people who knew how to exploit the system. And yet, time after time, the authorities failed to act. When Wedger brought the allegations to council representatives and other officials, they didn't investigate the claims, they ignored them. Even worse, some of the councils involved in these areas publicly denied ever hearing about the issue. How could they not have known? The evidence was there. Children were disappearing. Children were being sold in the most affluent areas of London. But the system, the very system that was supposed to protect them, was complicit in their victimization. Here's where things get even more alarming. This wasn't a one-time incident or a flash-in-the-pan crime wave. This wasn't some isolated event. This was a systematic operation that lasted for 20 years, 2 decades of continuous abuse. And throughout that entire time, the most powerful people in London were either unaware of what was happening or they chose to look away. From the early days of Ken Livingstone's tenure as Mayor of London to Boris Johnson's time in office and now under Sadiq Khan, the same thing happened. Each successive mayor ignored or downplayed the issue. And the Metropolitan Police, which has been through its own scandals over the years, either failed to investigate or chose to protect the reputation of the institution rather than protect the children. This was not a failure by just one mayor or one police commissioner. This was a systemic failure, a cover-up that stretched across political administrations and police leadership. This was a business, and business models don't run themselves. To sell children for £2,000 each, the criminals needed to have infrastructure in place. The logistics required to move children from crack houses to Mayfair restaurants, to transport them between multiple locations, and to keep them hidden from the authorities meant the operation had to be well-funded, well-connected, and highly organized. This wasn't some small-time, disorganized gang. This was a global network, one that profited from human trafficking, moving children from one location to another in a meticulously planned operation. And the fact that the authorities turned a blind eye to it for 2 decades shows the extent of the problem. It wasn't just criminal, it was institutional. The connections between this operation and London's drug trade were equally disturbing. Wedger's investigation revealed that children were being traded for crack cocaine. Sometimes as little as £50 worth of drugs would change hands for the lives of children. The operation was tied into organized crime networks, money laundering operations, and a criminal ecosystem that stretched far beyond the City of London. This wasn't just about a few people exploiting vulnerable children. This was about a well-oiled machine that had been running for 20 years. The story gets darker as we pull back the layers of corruption and systematic failure. These weren't isolated cases of criminal activity. This was a global network operating right under the noses of the powerful. And while children were being abused, the authorities did nothing, or worse, they covered it up. In the next part, we'll take a closer look at how the authorities' actions, or inactions, are damaging the credibility of the Metropolitan Police and the British government. We'll examine the political fallout that's coming and why this is more than just a local issue. It's a national scandal with global implications. Stay tuned for Part 3, where we'll look at the explosive consequences of this cover-up and the fight for justice. By now, you know the horrifying details of the child trafficking network that has been operating under the radar in London for 2 decades. You've seen how a decorated detective, John Wedger, uncovered the scale of the abuse, how the system turned its back on the victims, and how the authorities, including Sadiq Khan and the Metropolitan Police, worked tirelessly to suppress the truth. But this story isn't over. It's only just beginning. The fight for justice is far from won, and the political fallout is about to reach explosive levels. The children whose lives were stolen, they may be adults now, but their fight for justice is still going. And if you think this scandal was just a local problem, think again. The implications of what's been uncovered stretch far beyond London. This could bring down politicians, law enforcement agencies, and entire political systems. So, let's look at what's next. The aftermath of this bombshell testimony, the national consequences for British politics, the global implications, and why the victims deserve justice, and why we can no longer ignore this issue. For the 52 children whose lives were destroyed, the fight for justice has been a long and grueling one. The victims, who are now adults, have spent their entire lives knowing that the system failed them. They were abused, trafficked, and discarded like objects, while those in power looked the other way. Many of them will never recover from the trauma. Some may never get the chance to live a normal life, knowing the system failed them at every turn. These children weren't just victims of criminals, they were victims of a societal failure, a governmental failure, and a systemic failure that turned its back on them when they needed help the most. And yet, these victims are still fighting for justice. They deserve to see the perpetrators held accountable. They deserve to see the authorities who allowed this to happen face the consequences. Politicians, police officers, and council representatives who ignored their plight need to be held accountable, not just with words, but with real, tangible actions. These children, now adults, have lived with the knowledge that the very institutions that were supposed to protect them were complicit in their suffering. Their abusers walked free, and the powerful remained untouched. But the time has come for that to change. It's time for the truth to come out, for justice to be served, and for the system to finally answer for its failure. Now, let's turn to the political implications of this scandal. As we've seen, Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, is deeply entangled in this cover-up. His response to the allegations? Silence. When asked directly about the trafficking operations, His team dismissed the claims as politically motivated, a textbook deflection when the truth is too dangerous to acknowledge. Khan's inability or unwillingness to address these allegations shows his priorities. It's not about protecting the victims. It's not about bringing justice to those who have suffered. It's about preserving his own political career. By dodging questions and attacking the messenger, Khan has shown that political survival matters more to him than the lives of the children whose abuse was taking place in his own city. But Khan isn't the only one under fire. The Metropolitan Police, the very force responsible for investigating crime in the city, has been completely compromised by this scandal. The force has already been through a series of high-profile scandals, but nothing compares to the betrayal of trust revealed here. For years, the police knew about the trafficking rings. They knew about the abuse. And instead of investigating it, they protected the abusers and silenced those who tried to expose it. Officers within the force threatened to destroy the careers of those who attempted to expose the truth. They actively worked to prevent evidence from reaching the public. The Metropolitan Police can no longer claim to be the guardians of London's safety when they allowed this to happen. They have allowed their own reputation to come before the lives of children, and that's an unforgivable failure. But this scandal isn't just a local issue. It's a national one. If the allegations about London's trafficking network are true, and the evidence is overwhelming, then we have to ask ourselves, what does this say about the state of British politics and the system meant to protect its most vulnerable citizens? If the Mayor of London, who promised to protect the most vulnerable in the city, is complicit in covering up child trafficking, what does that say about the rest of the political class? This scandal stretches far beyond one politician. It calls into question the entire system that's supposed to be there to protect us. The fact that this network of abuse continued for 2 decades without anyone in power stepping forward to stop it is a national disgrace. It raises critical questions about the integrity of local governments, law enforcement, and the political leaders who were supposed to ensure that children were kept safe from harm. And the worst part? These are the people we trust to make decisions on our behalf. This scandal exposes the fundamental weakness and corruption within the British political system. If this can happen in London, what about the rest of the country? How can we trust that other cities and regions are any different? How can we trust the system to protect our children when this is what's happening in the heart of the country's capital? The truth is we can't. And the public is waking up to that fact. The implications of this scandal are also global. If wealthy international elites were involved in the abuse, the stakes are much higher than just a local crime ring. The fact that these trafficking operations were taking place in Mayfair, one of London's most prestigious neighborhoods, means that the global elite were likely involved. London has long been considered one of the world's leading financial capitals. But if this scandal is true, it suggests that those who have the power to make millions of pounds worth of deals might also have the power to silence the authorities when it suits them. This scandal could have significant global ramifications. If international business leaders, foreign investors, or politicians from other countries were involved in this trafficking ring, the impact on London's reputation could be devastating. Exposing child trafficking on this scale could ruin London's standing as a safe place for international business, and the ripple effects could be felt across the global economy. Moreover, the idea that children were trafficked and sold in luxurious Mayfair restaurants sends a chilling message. If this can happen in the world's financial capital, how much worse might things be elsewhere? The most important question now is, what happens next? The victims deserve justice. They deserve to know that the people who let them down, the politicians, the police officers, the council members, will be held accountable for their actions. This isn't just about fixing the system, it's about restoring trust in the system. The political and public pressure on Sadiq Khan and the Metropolitan Police is only going to grow. The demand for a national inquiry into grooming gangs is louder than ever, and it's clear that London's mayor and the Metropolitan Police can no longer evade responsibility. The public, too, must demand accountability. This scandal cannot be allowed to fade away. The families of the victims, the survivors themselves, and every concerned citizen must push for the truth to come out. The authorities must not be allowed to cover this up any longer. This is no longer just a story about politics, it's about justice. The victims of this trafficking operation deserve to see everyone who failed them held accountable. This scandal isn't going away. It's too big, too important, and the evidence is too overwhelming for it to be ignored any longer. The Metropolitan Police, Sadiq Khan, and the authorities who allowed this abuse to happen must face the consequences. And those 52 children, now adults, who were exploited, trafficked, and abandoned by the system, they deserve to see the people responsible for their suffering brought to justice. The system failed them for 20 years, but that doesn't mean it's too late for them to get the justice they deserve. The time to act is now. It's time to demand accountability, and it's time to make sure this never happens again. So, here's the final question. What are we willing to do about it? Will we let these children be forgotten once again, or will we stand up and make sure this never happens again? Drop your thoughts below, share this video, and let's make sure the truth comes out. If you want more stories that the establishment doesn't want you to hear, hit that subscribe button, smash the notification bell, and stay tuned. Because when the system fails children, we can't trust the media to hold them accountable. We have to do it ourselves.